One of the men in my group was sharing an experience he had when he had some issue with his sister, and he felt that he had to go and resolve this thing right away. And so as he's in the process of doing, though, he realized he was trying to solve a problem in his own flesh, in his own way. And God got his attention. He was doing 53 in a 40 zone, and he saw the light, and he was issued a ticket, and it gave him and afforded him an opportunity to recognize how stupid it is not to wait on the Lord and try to make it fix in our own timing, in our way. Isn't it? It's a simple lesson, but you have that opportunity to train yourself and recognize that. And we've all done some similar stupid things. It's amazing how many things we can do that it can be. We're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot. What was an insight that you got around your table? Anyone want to share about this? And it doesn't have to be just about waiting on the Lord, but it's certainly critical.
One thing that came up was that waiting on the Lord doesn't necessarily mean you're passive.
That's right.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you're passive. Yeah.
Someone, I think it was Dr. Stanley, said one time that a car is easier to turn when the wheels are moving. And I remember that. It's very true. That doesn't mean that you make a decision and I don't wait for God anymore. But if you feel that He's leading you toward a particular area,
yes.
you're moving that way.
Yeah, it's very difficult to steer a ship that's not moving. Yeah. And you can almost count on it that it's going to take. It won't be in our time frame, in our desire. We want it right away, want it instantly, and so that fundamental patience. And so steadfastness and patience is part of the fruit of the Spirit.
I've discussed this with you, but I was sharing this with the table. This quote from Henry VI, Part 2. It's in Act 1, Scene 1, where he says, "May the Lord who lends me life give me a heart full of gratitude." And the part that really resonates with me, everything I have is on loan. It really comes from Him.
Yeah.
It's really Him. And if you can just keep playing to that audience of one and just have that grateful heart, your whole perspective changes and you don't get as burdened with the trinkets and beads of this world.
Yeah. Turning from grumbling to gratitude is a big change. It's the difference between walking in the flesh and walking in the Spirit. Remember when he says, rejoice always, pray without ceasing. And what's the third part he says in 1 Thessalonians 5? What does he say? In all things. It sounds rather all-encompassing, doesn't it? Give thanks in everything. And remember that, what do we call that? The hard thanksgiving. What do we mean by the hard thanksgiving? Thanking Him for things we do not want. That's a hard thanksgiving. That's a thanksgiving that requires a measure of trust and faith, doesn't it? Because I can't see how this horrible thing can be possibly redemptive. But yet I'm called to thank God in all things. And if that's the case, then it means that God's going to redeem what He allows, and He's going to use it in some way for good that I cannot currently see. So that's a matter of then living by faith rather than by sight. And having that stance of gratitude is a choice. Remember, I've said before, 3 things that come to mind are choices. Joy, contentment, gratitude are all choices that we make. And they can either be in one modality and the other. It's the difference between being in the flesh and being in the Spirit. So choosing the way of gratitude is a faith stance rather than something that's based upon circumstances, but it's based rather on God's character, not your circumstances.
How do you balance the idea of trusting patience with living on the edge of eternity?
Yes, that's a good question. Balance the idea of trusting and patience in the present and living on the edge of eternity. Well, the recognition of eternity contextualizes the present. So it's more, not so much of a balance perhaps, but a contextualization of what we're involved in. I need a bigger story. See, if I'm in the middle of a story, but I haven't read the end, I'm guessing. But only when I'm really read the full thing and I see how it's going to conclude, will I know what I'm looking at. Is this a tragedy or is it a comedy? Is it going to end well or not? And if we are in that last act and we can see, or we can read that last act and see that he is going to work all things together for good. That's a faith proposition, but it informs that future hope informs my present process. It informs the decisions I'm making. And so to walk by the Spirit invites me to live as if the future really is my true destination. The future that God has promised for you and me is one that's quite glorious, quite remarkable. And it's going to be, you've heard me say so many times, endless creative activity without frustration to the glory of God. You're not going to just be sitting around doing nothing. You're going to be, but what we can anticipate is far better than what we can now see. So if I don't want to project the present into the future, but the future into the present. Does that make sense, that idea? Projecting the future into the present rather than the present into the future. Because if I do the present into the future, it's rather depressing. Because because this life, as I said, it seems to be a complete tragedy. And it seems that things are not right as they need to be. Well, we already knew that. It takes no faith to believe we're living in a fallen world. And I don't want to wring my hands in despair and despondency, but rather to lift my hands in joy and reception of the grace of the present moment that's training me in righteousness for the goods to come. So even the training in righteousness, the sorrow, the suffering, is used by God to give us the fruit, the peaceful fruit of righteousness, rather than something that is going to be defined by the pain of this present moment. I'm allowing the future hope to inform the present darkness and to walk in the light as he himself is in the light. And that to me is a great way of living. Any last thought? Yes.
Yeah, it seemed to me that the patience is for the outcome. Like when I first was trying to sell computer equipment, they told me, it's like a long water hose. You just have to start pushing water in the hose. There'll be a day where it'll come out like a gusher at the other end. But you have to do the planting, the seeds. You just plant the seeds and eventually a harvest will come. So our patience needs to be for the outcome.
Yes, I think that's right. And what we're looking at here are not temporal outcomes, but eternal consequences. So that what we do in today really matters. Everything I do this day is going to count. And that phrase, living is so daily, because that's all you've got. But every day has enough trouble of its own. But if I live and invite myself to live in light of God's promises for the future that inform this present darkness, then I can walk in patience and hope rather than despair. We're in a great story, and it's going to end well.